Hi, I'm James McGuire, and today we're discussing cloud security and the various elements of an effective cloud security strategy. To discuss that, I'm joined by Dave Frampton, Vice President of Security Solutions at Sumo Logic. Dave, hello to you, and happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday to you, James. Great to be here.
So I'd like to ask you, where are we now with cloud security? And if I can put that question in a little context, I think it's been established that cloud is safer than on-prem. I'm sure not everyone would agree with that, but it seemed like years ago, people thought, oh, cloud is dangerous. We better keep it all in-house. But we don't hear about data breaches in the cloud so much. We hear about a lot of data breaches for companies. The other part of that question is that perhaps it's enterprises that are failing to meet their side of the bargain, that, the large cloud providers have really put clear security protocols in place. Maybe now it's up to the enterprise to step up and invest. All that palaver to say, what's your take on cloud security? Where are we today?
Well, I think to start with the original part of your question and observation there, we're well past the tipping point. I think you can find your favorite statistic. I saw one just the other day that said that in 18 months, 60% of companies' digital assets would be, in the cloud. So I think whichever, stat you pick, we're clearly well past a tipping point where cloud security is not the new thing and the adjunct thing, it's the main thing.
Right. Right.
Along with that, there comes a necessary awareness of the basics. I mean, many of these are security challenges that were faced in the old on-prem worlds, as you allude to, and now they just need to be ported, to the cloud. So there's a sense of, okay, there's visibility and scale and identity and all of these things. I think what the cloud does is really just challenges doing the basics at scale. And I think that's from a perspective of the amount of data volumes that you have to look at in order to get basic visibility, the amount of third parties that might be chained together to execute a basic function, which might have been more kind of monolithic, in the past. So I think one, if you look at sort of the current punch list of challenges, I think we're resisting, as you point out. We understand the basic issues, but now we're trying to operationalize doing some of these basics at scale to the cloud. And I think you hit on another big one, which is just understanding the shared responsibility model. And I think what's interesting about that is, even beyond just understanding what is a platform as a service responsibility versus an infrastructure as a service responsibility, there's understanding within an enterprise who needs to understand that and who's responsible. Meaning, in the old world, you had one security operation center in a SOC, and you had a dedicated team there, and they were sort of globally responsible for everything. But in emerging cloud models, you have more of a federated model where you have individual lines of business that have security responsibility for, in many cases, software that they develop in that line of business. As a part of digital transformation that has, faces the internet, uses, public tooling, to create that software.
And so when I hear the word federated, just a short interruption. When I hear the word federated, I hear the word less secure, but don't let me interrupt too much.
You hit on a fault line that CISOs debate all the time. I think trying to find the sweet spot for your org and your regulatory environment of how centralized and locked down you need to be. If you centralize too much, then you're slowing down the velocity of the business. And so there's a ditch on that side of the road. You distribute too much, and then you lose coherence and end up with people that have responsibility that exceeds their capacity and their skill set. So CISOs debate this all the time in a cloud security context: is how do I educate and partner with the lines of business in order to make sure that we identify that sweet spot, that shared responsibility, which is challenging enough in and of itself, because you generally have to go up the stack and protect at the application layer, be responsible for that in a way that you maybe didn't in the on-prem world. You need new skill sets and all of that. But then, stepping back and realizing you might have one line of business that is far down the maturity curve of capacity in that area, whereas you have four others that aren't. And they have that self-awareness. Are we committed as an organization to up-leveling and whatnot? So I think that's also just, a current, I think, challenge of the basics at scale. federation, you hit on federation a minute ago, so I'll double click on that.
Please. Yeah.
And some in the long list of cloud security to spend a little more time on. I think the other challenge is many companies started out using a single cloud and
Right.
on Amazon and said, okay, now my challenge is I need to learn, how all this works in Amazon, all these different, tools and services, and should I use them or should I use my own, and all of that. What does the logging data look like? But increasingly, for business continuity, for economic leverage, avoiding lock-in, and for geographic and regulatory reasons, people are adopting more of a multi-cloud approach where you end up with, say, Google and Azure, as Microsoft, as well as Amazon.
Totally.
AWS.
Right.
You have to think about, well, now these three environments, they have some broad similarities, but there are key differences amongst all three of those environments, and you being aware of how do I understand what those differences are, understand which ones I'm going to force harmonize and normalize on my end, and which ones tolerate difference in. And this federation challenge even extends to the data itself, where it's stored. You increasingly have an increase in nationalism, where people for security and compliance reasons, potentially even motivated by some politics at some point,
Right.
want to have data located within certain national boundaries, and at the technology layer underneath that creates some fundamental questions about how do we effectively search across these different federated regions. So you may have regions that fragment, and then you may have clouds that fragment, and sort of as a security practitioner, this is a big challenge. I mean, you not only have to figure out how to secure all of this, but you have to figure it out in that kind of fragmented map across those different axes. So where we are to net all that out, you ask where we are in cloud security. We are past the tipping point. This cloud security is security, I think, for sure. Now what people are trying to do is the basics at scale and start to operationalize this, recognizing that they're going to be running their businesses here, and that they're going to have to partner and collaborate in a more distributed way with the lines of business, as opposed to the old way where it was really the silo and the central security operations center that set the rules and in detect, investigate, respond, all of that. The new world is far more diverse and complex than that. It just requires different skill sets, both at a technology level and also just at a leadership and collaboration level. I'd say 9 out of 10 of the the late night complaining sessions with CISOs are how do I transform my org to an org that has the maturity to go out and strike these alliances, evangelize where appropriate, build trust, with people who maybe don't understand as much about security as they do.
Right.
So it's some of this is not just technology; it sort of goes beyond that and into more of a business skill set that's becoming required in a lot of security operations as this cloud transition has moved ahead.
Yeah, so it's an interesting challenge you describe, in that there was the old world. Is sort of there was a moat, there was a one bridge you get to cross, and now of course it's federated, and in that spread out world, there's more people who might be putting their password on a sticky note and taping it to the front of their PC. You never know, that kind of stuff. It's like you never know what might be going on with that more federated routine. Hopefully it's not that bad. So that's the challenge. If that's the challenge, then what is the solution? And that, how do you describe a cohesive cloud security strategy? What sort of elements need to be in place?
It's a great question. In some sense, going back to the previous, cloud security is security, so it's a familiar checklist.
Right.
But I would say that there's a couple of areas that become more important in a cloud context relative to a previous, as you go through the checklist of, I'm going to need I need my visibility, I need my compliance, and all the usual things. One of them, I think, is the importance of the question, what am I protecting, and how do I, with what priority, and how do I align my spend and my effort with what is most sensitive for me? Because it's easy in a cloud context to go down the rabbit hole of trying to go to the absolute bottom of some of these chain third-party services and spend an enormous amount of your budget and energy, on something like that. But as an example, if your bigger business problem and risk is fraud, you may be, sort of spending all of your energy in the wrong place, right? And I think
Mm,
cloud just provides more opportunities for that misalignment than there was in the previous model. So I think
mhm,
to me, that's a big element of this. I think the second one is whether your company is there or not in the journey of digital transformation, you have to assume that it will be there, and that will be the default mechanism of business transaction for your business. Now, that's not true, obviously, of certain isolated industries, but by and large, most of the economy will run in a very digitally transformed way, in which a lot of that used to be sort of physical, it will end up being digital, and that will be delivered, sort of over the internet.
right.
If the business gets further and further down that path, what you need to protect and how you need to protect it, and the skill sets and the tooling and the budget that you need to protect it, they shift pretty dramatically. It's much more this sort of higher layer application focus as opposed to the old infrastructure layer, right? As you point out, the cloud provider is doing a lot of that now, right? So you don't
Mhm,
worry about that as much. You need to think about the business context of these applications. So, for example, you have an analyst in the SOC who's trying to deal with an alert that has been provided by one of the tools. In
right.
the old days, you could take a sysadmin, train them up in that analyst role, and after a little bit of experience, they would be more or less self-contained and know what to do. Kind of, how do I figure out what happened? Where did it spread? What do I do about it? That's a
Mhm,
sort of core workflow that goes on inside of the security operations center.
right.
In the new digital transformation model, it may not be clear whether there's a security issue or not. You may need
Mm,
collaborate with the application teams, the service reliability engineering teams, teams that really you didn't have that much interaction with in the previous model, but now are essential to iteratively puzzle through, is this a security issue? What's the business context? This
mhm,
application might have been talking to an externally risky entity with high frequency, but maybe that's appropriate given the function of that part of the application was to register inbound solicitation requests, right? So,
oh,
and
right.
so knowing that business context and the application context becomes more essential for the security people who are working in this model. So you get this sense that a modern cloud security strategy needs to take into account, assume that we get to that end state of digital transformation, and I have to then plan my skill sets, my personnel, maybe my rotation. Maybe I create a virtual SOC. Maybe I rotate engineers in and out of the SOC. These
Mhm.
things were just not on the table 5 years ago. When people thought about the SOC and the skill sets that you would need, and how to retain, people, and how to lock it down and control it and only give visibility to a small number of people. I mean, this is sort of you need to think in your cloud strategy about, even if I'm not there yet, I need to assume that I will be, and then how do I plan ahead to get there?
Well, it sounds, I mean, from hearing you speak, that really this new world of cloud security is exponentially more complicated than the old world of we need to secure the data center. I mean,
Hmm.
it's like it's certainly possible to be as secure as we were in the old world, to the extent we were secure. But it seems like this new scenario is way more complicated than it used to be. Am I correct in thinking that?
For sure, there's more complexity. I don't think anybody would debate that. I think
Yeah.
some of the complexity has shifted from one area to another. And don't forget, I mean, it's like the security topic is always one where you can obsess about the wall of worry, and then you sort of get a little bit too pessimistic about it. Realize at the same time, the cloud has enabled some new tools for defenders that didn't exist previously. So just give you an example. One
Hmm.
is this idea of community analytics, meaning
Hmm.
the old world, you protected the environment on-prem in your environment. You had your SOC, you watched carefully, you tried to learn, maybe get a threat feed and learn from the experiences of others. But
Hmm.
in the new world, there's technology at several layers of the stack that can observationally look at large numbers of customers and how they're behaving, how they're reacting, and do this in an anonymized way, and then surface actionable insights about the experience of the many to the individual customer. So for example,
In real time, you're saying, or is it not in real time?
in real time, and this is
Yeah.
fueled by, what are, I would say candidly, more practical applications of machine learning than existed in security in the early hype cycle days of that, right? Because
Hmm.
learning is very good at clustering together who should be your peer group, and across large sets of data, what patterns emerge that stand out against the noise. So you can apply those techniques to large numbers of customers and then surface to individual customers calibration of is something rare or not. Have other people reacted to this in an immediate way or a delayed way?
Hmm.
How do I calibrate severity? How am I different? How is my environment different than other environments in terms of how I've organized my defense? So the cloud has opened up a little bit more of a collective defense set of options that really didn't exist before. So yes, you're right. The complexity is way up. You need to retool your
Hmm.
people, the approach, you have to let go of control, all of those things. But it's also just, opened up some powerful new tools. Automation would be another one I would throw out there, that
Right, right.
environments are much more adept at figuring out ways to standardize across environments so that you can automate what used to involve human intervention. And in that way, dramatically increase the efficiencies of your people, and decrease your response times and all. So
Don't you, there's one quick question about the automation. Don't you think that the bad guys realize, oh, this is an automated system I'm interacting with? So I realize that exactly every 37 minutes, they're going to let down. So I'll just wait for that 37-minute point. Whereas with a human, you never knew, but with the automated system, you know how to fool it better. Or it doesn't work like that at all?
you're right. Automation is a two-edged sword, right? You have to be cognizant not only of the risks that you mentioned, but obviously, if the core automation scripting engine itself is compromised, then obviously you have a whole new risk surface that comes. I would just say two things on this. One is, I think this is not a choice. I mean,
Mm,
the scale of this problem it's not a human scale problem anymore. So
right.
everyone has to automate to have a prayer of keeping up. So then the question is, how do I automate with discipline? How do I put in
Mm,
policy so that I mitigate the risks that you're pointing out, and
mhm.
others that we could go through. But I think the consensus is very broad at this point, that the trick is just figuring out how do we do this as responsibly as we can, not kind of dragging our feet, and will we do it? I would say, just for your audience is sort of wrestling with some of these things. One thing we see customers wrestling with a lot in automation is sphere of control, because a lot
Oh,
of times it's very clear, say for a security analyst, hey, I need to take some quick remediation action as a result of this threat. I need to quarantine these users, just as an
okay.
example. Lots of examples, right? Um, but based on the way the IT infrastructure is set up, I may need to get buy-in and approval from an engineering team, an IT leader, or a line of business leader, in order to take some automated action, in the middle of the night, right? That has
Mm,
lots of consequences that maybe I don't understand as a security analyst. Maybe we were about
right.
to have a product launch the next morning, and I, not knowing this, I shut down some critical part of the website that was supposed to go live, right? I mean, there's
Sure.
also, so I just say on the automation front, there's a technology question we were on before, which is, hey, how do I make sure I do this thoughtfully so the hackers can't compromise it, and we have the
Right.
buy-in? But there's also this sort of organizational and policy governance question that usually is thought about too late in the process. And
Mm,
I just, for people out there that are struggling with this type of thing, try as
right.
you can get ahead of that. As you start thinking about the ways to harness automation, which are more numerous in the cloud, as we were talking about, than they used to be, and really the only way you can keep up.
Mhm. You know, I really, it's super interesting. I'd like to get your sense of where we're going in the future. And you've talked about that somewhat, but if we're looking at cloud security in the year 2024, which is frighteningly close, what's going to be going on, and how can we be ready for that now, or trying to get ready for what's going to be going on now? What's your prediction?
I think maybe this is even a broader time span than just the next few years. But I think
Yeah.
about three things as I think about sort of the next 5 to 10 years in
Sure.
and really security. The first one is something we haven't talked about so far in the podcast here, which is the economics of this. I mean, the
Hmm.
foundation of most security defenses is core visibility, right? It's pretty straightforward. If you can't see it, then you're obviously providing a level of opportunity for your adversary.
Right.
What it translates into is I need to collect a lot of telemetry, a lot of data, whether it's you could call it logs or metrics or event data or context, or pick your favorite,
Mhm.
for all of that. And the amount of that data that I need to collect is growing at a pretty exponential rate because of all
Right.
the creation of all of these different modular software development processes, all of these different specialized, SaaS tools, and
Sure.
right. And so there's a question: how do I how do I how do I ingest all of that data? How do I store it for a long enough period of time to do analytics, that I need to do to catch these kind of low and slow attacks that only develop over a longer period of time?
Right.
The economics that are very challenging for customers, and I think there is it will be a big frontier of innovation and disruption and creativity, how people choose to deal with that problem. Um,
Hmm.
there are
It's too expensive, is what you're saying. Is that? Am I hearing you right?
it's too expensive, is probably number one. There's also a scaling issue of can I bring all that data into one place and analyze it, or do I need to distribute the processing of all of this data? It's a little bit sort of down the weeds technically, but it,
Right.
I think in the big picture, people are going to start looking for alternative models and moving away from some of the legacy models where a lot of this was bundled together in a single kind of monolith. Like, we want to solve your security problem, so we'll just give you 8 layers of the stack, and
Right.
there's some cost in this layer, but we'll monetize it in that layer, but you won't know the difference because we're just going to kind of put it all together, with a bill.
Sure.
I think this notion of what is the data lake that is going to be cost effective enough and high performant enough to support the core visibility is going to be a big battleground. Lots of tough choices, lots of great innovation,
Mhm.
but I think that's going to be a big part of keeping up with the cloud. The community analytics thing, I think the next step of that, if I arced out more to 2024 and beyond, I think people will
Right.
marry these models of data analytics, whether they're ML or AI or what have you. They'll model them with large scale simulation, because
Hmm.
that's really the only mechanism to keep up with the pace of the attackers and the amount of adaptive change that they can bring to bear at so many different places at the same time. Is you have to do something which avoids the manual human processes of learning from your experience and then upgrading your defense and doing that. It's just too slow. So
Right.
figuring out how to marry advanced analytics and then simulation to basically apply that analytics on real data, on similar data, on community data, and then bring that back into your own environment, I think is going to be really one of the 2 or 3 pivotal ways that the defense has to adapt
Hmm.
in the next. And the last one is, I think we
Yeah.
hit well, but it's just the automation. I mean, the pace of all this will increase to the point that you're going to have to refactor the budgets around engineering and security so that they're much less concentrated in human capital, right? And we're going
Hmm.
to think about this process very, very holistically between engineering and security to automate this inside the product and then outside and around the product being the digitally transformed, sort of business app that is the core engine of the company, um,
Right.
in a way that I think we've just scratched the surface on now, right? With
Hmm.
DevSecOps and all of this. This is like inning number 2 in a 9-inning game to think about how horizontally and how much automation we're going to have to build in, to really secure the environment as you look out in these longer timeframes. Now, some of these things I'm talking about, maybe a little out past 2024, but
Right.
but to your question of, what do I think about and hear about from thought leaders and customers as they kind of think about, okay, big picture, where
Sure.
going in the next longer cycle. Those three, the economics and simulation, analytics, and automation are probably the three that come up.
Yeah, the simulation one is really cool. It's like it's the idea of creating a model, so you sort of like model it out. You game it out ahead of time, which seems like that is going to be a very necessary piece. You can't just put the castle wall up there and wait for the attackers. You want to model it out. Is that the idea?
And right now, back to the 9 inning game, and where are we? I don't know why baseball came.
This is probably baseball season right now, I think. So there you go.
It's terribly outdated, but it's you think about the common mainstream practices. Okay, we're gonna do a red team exercise, right? So I'm gonna pay some external firm. They're gonna come in and probe the environment, and
Yep.
we'll not tell people we're doing it, and then we'll do an after action report, see what we found. Not all of that. So this is
Sure.
great practice. If you think about that, there are people that monetize the insight and the capital to be able to apply those tools in a one-time fashion on your environment, but it doesn't require a leap of imagination to say, if we looked at that differently and we were able to economically simulate our own environment completely and then 24/7 continuously attack that with a simulator,
Right.
and then assess the weaknesses in our defense and then automate the closing of the holes in those defense like that. This is
Yeah.
this is where this needs to go. Not like the board gave me an extra budget this year to hire the red team consulting firm that that I put in. So that
Right.
you're absolutely right. That one, I really think that's one of the only paths to scale this.
Well, all right, then that leads me to one last question. I know we're running late, but I find that fascinating based on what you just said, because it's sort of like you simulate it out and then you automate the attack, or you maybe automate the defense, or automate both. And that gives you a big advantage. Having that simulation and having that automation gives you a big advantage. All that, as you mentioned, is going to be very expensive. So it's sort of like we look ahead to this world where we can get into some very sophisticated security situations with the simulation and the automation, but it's going to be pricey. So it's going to, perhaps, correct me if I'm wrong, create this digital have and have not, where the really people with the deep pockets really can protect themselves from cyber attackers, but without those deep pockets, you really can't. Or will this filter down and become democratized, and really even like Joe's Pizza Joint can have simulation and automation of whatever?
You heard my aspiration earlier with the community analytics. I think my hope is on the democratization of this. And I mean, keep in mind too that the people with the deep pockets, they have the burden of being the ones that are getting targeted by the attackers, as opposed
Right.
to scanned casually by the middle. So there's sort of a there's almost a matching effect there that goes with the risk.
Right.
I think that, like many technologies in security and otherwise in IT, the early versions of this are going to be prototyped and borne out both on the vendor side and on the enterprise side, by
Mhm.
people that have those extra resources. But I think if you look at the history of the economics of a lot of the technologies that we now use as mainstream in the defense, including, for example, since this is about cloud security, I mean, look at the amount of security that the three cloud providers provide for free as a part of their very inexpensive service, and their
Right.
free massive portfolio of security tools that are available to Joe. I think you said Joe's Parlor or whoever it was.
Joe's Pizza. Yeah. Right.
And imagine if you had backed up the clock 10 years, and I mean, for Joe's Pizza to have access to those technologies at those near zero
Right.
points would have been kind of a little bit mind blowing. So obviously, the truth is somewhere in the middle, but I
Mhm.
there's at least some evidence to not despair that it will degenerate into full have and have not. I think um,
Okay.
I think this will be something that and the cloud providers, back to your theme of the of the show here, they have a big role to play in this. I mean, they'll be able to absorb and assimilate and not let some of this innovation just be captured in high premium, sort of vendor monetization models. And I
Mhm.
think that will help this process along as well.
Hmm. Well, it's reassuring. Dave, I very much appreciate you sharing your expertise today. I learned a ton. It's super interesting. Thank you very much.
James, it's great to talk to you. Great to be here.